The following is my conversation with Jesuit scholar, professor, and philosopher, Father Robert McTeigue. You may know him from his radio show, The Catholic Current, where I've been a guest. This is the first time that I'd spoken with him in a free-form setting with no time constraints, and our topics ranged far and wide. Look out for his sly sense of humor. He slipped in a few very funny lines that I only caught when I watched it later. This was recorded November 4th, 2021. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. This is Father Robert McTeigue, and he is a professor of theology and philosophy and a member of the Jesuits of Maryland chapter, I believe.
It's Eastern Province, yeah.
Yeah, Eastern Province. Correct me if I never know how to pronounce Jesuit. Sometimes I want to go zh, and sometimes I want to go zzz.
Okay, it's Jesuit. It's not the Z. Unless
Okay.
you say, so Jesuitical, Jesuit, yeah.
Okay.
So it's not the Z.
And as I'm sure that most of my audience understands, you guys are like the Navy SEALs of priests.
Right. Extreme selection process, extreme training. We do the missions off the books, things that aren't covered in the manuals. And we also have an extreme casualty rate. If you're a Jesuit saint, there's a 97% probability that you're also a martyr, which
Wow.
I learned after I joined. It wasn't in any of the promotional literature.
You were there, of course, you are there in the library at Trinity College.
It sure looks that way, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
So they like parachute you guys in for all the rough stuff.
That's right. You know, we need Jim Kirk on this one. We need one or two guys behind enemy lines to be dramatic force multipliers. This is what we do. Yeah.
And of course, the Da Vinci Code is safe with you guys.
Oh, there's all sorts of stories we could tell.
That must have been a little bit of a trial when Dan Brown's books were everywhere.
Yeah, well, yes, and people take that as history and veracity. It's a poorly written story, and most of it isn't true.
He used that great trick, though, where all the chapters were 3 pages. So you'd fly through the book feeling like you were making real progress.
Make a real progress.
I read 40 chapters today. You know, it's a little,
yeah,
a little,
yeah. There is a sleight of hand there.
a little bit of yeah. I learned that one. But you were talking about how we connected. We connected online, and I think that maybe we'll start this conversation with the idea of how connections are changing so much. And
Right.
clearly, you and I probably would never have met unless we'd been on the same train somewhere. I'm sure we would have had a similar conversation. But without there being this internet connection in all of our lives, you and I wouldn't have met. And I'm sure many
Most likely.
people that we're happy to meet. But don't you think it's maybe locally that connections have begun to fray?
Yes, yeah. I mean, you and I met because I stumbled upon you on YouTube, and I said, "Wow, I really like this guy. I like what he has to say. He's an honest man. The kind of guy I want to talk with." And you know, I host the Catholic Current, and when you're doing a talk show 5 days a week, you're always looking for content and guests and so on. And then we connected, and
And you were nice enough to have me on the show.
Right, yeah, and you've been on several times. You're one of the favorites. You're definitely always on the invite back list. But ordinarily, we wouldn't have met. So it's kind of on the one hand. On the other hand, meeting people that I never would have met before. You know, I use Facebook very minimally because I have some friends in remote parts of the world. It's the only way that we connect. The danger is that we get locked into staring into the screen.
Yes.
What happens as a result of that? You know, when I was teaching undergrads full time, there were kids who told me, you know, they have an interest in Miss Wonderful or Mr. Great, and they said, well, we only text, we don't talk, because phone conversations are just too intimate.
Right.
Wait, what? Right? And we get locked in. Another case in point, I was counseling an elderly couple, and the guy was spending all of his waking hours in Facebook, and it was only, you know, looking up old high school photographs from his football glory days and looking at cat pictures. There was nothing lurid about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when his wife said, "Hello, real person here," and he said, "Well, it's my right." I said, "Look, if you get into it, it's my right to look at Facebook or not. You don't get into it. Just say, I miss you. And here's all the real world things that we could be doing if you weren't staring into the screen. There was a guy named Cliff Stoll back in the 90s. He wrote a book called Selling Silicon Snake Oil. And he
Hmm.
said, rather than just watching videos of people baking bread, bake bread yourself.
Yes.
So I think that, the electronic gateway, I'm glad for it, but like everything else, it's got to be used in moderation. And we have to admit too that a lot of the big purveyors of what the screen offers you want to get you addicted.
Yes,
And we have to say
absolutely.
that. We have to use that language.
And they do. And if they get you addicted by giving you that thing that makes you tingle, that's
Right.
fine with them. And they don't care
Right.
if that thing that makes you tingle happens to have some hatred attached to it, or
Right.
it involves you going down some sort of rabbit hole of Q or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Or
It's infinite distraction and it's infinite seduction. There is a book called Hooked by Ralph. I think it's Ralph McElhenney, and he was talking about what happens to kids who get involved. Adolescent kids with their brain still developing, and they get involved in either online pornography or real life promiscuity. You end up seeking the dopamine rush, and you end up silencing that part of your body and soul that wants to make unique and intimate connections.
right.
So whether it's promiscuity in person, pornography online, or online addiction of any kind, you're crushing your attention span, you're exaggerating your desire for dopamine, and you're putting yourself further and further into a hole in hell of isolation.
And you're turning the whole idea of intimacy upside down.
Yes.
I always recommend to young people, if when on the few occasions that they ask me my opinion, to carry out each step of courtship as long as they possibly can. You start holding hands with somebody, you can get your rush off that for
Right.
months. And
Right.
and then gradually get to the place where you put your arm around her, and gradually get to
Right.
the place where you kiss her on the cheek. Bring it all out as long as possible. And by the time you get to any place of the kind of intimacy that is going to cause bonding chemicals to release in the body, you
Right.
know that person pretty well, and you know whether or not you want to get bonded with them. If you do that on the first or third date, you end up bonded to somebody who's going to knock you around if you happen to be a young girl.
Right. I mean, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, in her collection of poetry called The Sonnets from the Portuguese, rhapsodized about her future husband putting his hand on her gloved palm.
Yes.
Uh, As
I can feel the tingle myself.
Right,
Yeah.
and so she ends up crying out, what I do and what I dream must include thee, as the wine must taste of its own grapes.
Mm.
So there's a wisdom to a very incremental intimacy.
Yes.
And we've rushed past that for all sorts of reasons, and the destruction is terrible beyond counting.
Well, I think the reason that we've rushed past it so much is that the culture has been one of change for its own sake, and
Right.
to erode everything that is before, just because there's sort of a mass narcissism guiding the culture, that if it was done before us, we can't take credit for it. And
Right.
and who wants to be like old people?
Right.
Who wants to?
Right.
Oh, the past, ick.
Well, we confuse creativity with novelty. And
Mm,
because we have such short attention span, and we've hyper accelerated, especially with young people, they're craving for stimulation. Uh, it's bad for them. In my day, when I was an undergraduate and dinosaurs roamed the earth, you could have a professor take 6 weeks to unfold an argument step by step, detail by detail, and the great ones could make it fascinating. When I started teaching 30 years ago, there was an expectation, if you didn't have a ta-da at the end of 50 minutes or 75 minutes, that they were lost. And then one of the reasons I left teaching was I was tired of interrupting my lecture with the observation, this is the part where you write down what I say. And they would look at me in bewilderment, and later they looked at me at indignation. So we haven't done anybody any favors that way.
I was down at the beach yesterday, and I was reading your book here. Um,
Huzzah.
and I've got a rubber band around it because it's begun to be, it doesn't want to close of its own accord anymore because I have been fingering my way through it. But I was
Okay.
reading the part, this chapter yesterday on anthropology,
Hmm.
and I kept being mad at myself because I would, so a thought-provoking thing would come up in your writing, and I would
Hmm.
stop and think for a while. And I
Okay.
thought, but I'm in a hurry. I want to get all this stuff in here. And it's only just this moment speaking with you that I realized, well, that's probably the way to read this book. If it takes
Yes.
me 2 months to read the book and
Absolutely.
take it all in,
Absolutely.
that's because I am stopping to think about the things that want to
Right.
make me think.
Right. Right. When I told my students, I said, look, for most of my classes, the reading requirements are not onerous. It's
Hmm.
not it's not mountains of text. I said, but it will require you time to think about it. And I said, here's the key. You need to spend time in conversation with your classmates and walk through the text together so that you can push back and forth. What does this mean? How do you apply it? And you really know when you're getting somewhere, when you can say, no, that's not quite right. Here's why. And the other person can say, oh, yes, of course, I see that now. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the book is written not only to stimulate individual thought, but conversation and ultimately intellectual community.
Yeah, my dearest friend Alexia is teaches at Fuller Seminary out here in Pasadena, and so she teaches theology and she teaches development, community development, and
Mhm.
different things. And she's often talking about her class, right? And she knows them all intimately. And I will sometimes do a video, and then only 5,000 people will watch it, or 10,000 people, and I'll feel like an abject failure. And she'll go, "Well, I'm just thrilled that I'm getting through to 35 people."
Right.
And I said, but I think I'd be thrilled if I was getting through to 35 people who were looking me in the eye.
Yes.
And it's a different thing. And you experience this with your radio show, that you know that those people are out there, but you don't feel them coming back at you, even to the degree that they feel you coming at them. They're hearing your voice, your
Right.
inflections, the
Hmm.
workings of your mind, and it's going into them, but it doesn't necessarily reflect back to you. And this makes me think of a thing that I watched, a talk that you did from, it was at Courage International,
Yes.
and you were talking off the top of your head for 45 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And at the end, you opened it up to questions. And one woman said, "This is more of a comment, but I think that this is the best talk I've ever heard." And
Oh.
you flushed a little bit.
Hmm.
It caught you a little bit off guard, and it moved you. And
Hmm.
you could see that moment there. You could see that I've given them something, and this woman wants to thank me by letting me know that I've given her something, and by
Right.
letting me know that it's so sunk in, and then that circuit was complete.
Right.
And
Right. Yes, again, that sense of community. I was dramatically influenced by my late great mentor, Dr. Paul Weiss. And I like to say that if I believed in reincarnation, I would insist he was the reincarnation of Socrates. And when I started teaching, I fell in love with teaching and didn't think that anything could be better than that. And then when I started preaching, that took it to a whole new level. And he couldn't quite understand that. He said, well, how can you enjoy preaching? You're speaking, but no one's questioning you. And it's a different kind of dynamic. I mean, there is a sense of, you can tell whether or not you're connecting with people by their nonverbal responses, and you really do have to learn how to read a crowd. So to either move it along or redirect or just pause and let the spirit rush in and just go where it leads. It's harder to do that now with people are masked. But when I preached in London, I had all these very pious Brits, and they all just put their heads down like this and didn't move while I was speaking. And I couldn't tell whether or not I was crushing it or boring them to death. They did invite me back. So I said, well, how do I break through and make the connection? So I started my next sermon with, if you watch me very carefully, and that made them look up. The challenge is how to do this when it's just me by myself and the microphone. And I know my engineer hears me, but it's just the microphone. And I've actually gone to a former student of mine who's now a voice coach. His name is William Hughes. And I said, well, how do I make the connection when there's nobody here in the room? And we talked about not only physical things, but mental and imagination that way. So there is a great stimulus. There's a completion of the circuit. I'm not looking for accolades, but to have that recognition of, oh, the seed went where it was supposed to go and now it's doing something. The reason I want that feedback is that if I'm missing it, then I want to be able to redirect. So I spoke recently in Fort Worth, and again had that similar experience of I just had a few bullet points, but it was their responses that helped to drive the conversation.
As a stage performer, I have noticed a phenomenon when I was performing regularly, and I thought I was pretty much at the top of my game, and I was with a band that knew the songs, and everybody was tight, and we were enjoying each other on stage. And I would look out in the audience, and we'd finish up, and I would notice that the audience members would turn toward each other and immediately start talking. And at first I took offense at that, like, what am I, chopped liver? Forgot me so soon? Didn't you know?
Right.
I was brilliant tonight. And then it occurred to me, oh, they've been hearing me tell my stories, and now they want to tell their stories. And
Right.
now if I see that happen, I think, job well done, and I peacefully and in a Zen state begin to break down the stage.
Right,
And
right.
I feel perfectly satisfied knowing that.
Well, they want to tell their stories to each other in light of the stories they just heard from you. I very much enjoyed the album that you sent me. You are a storyteller. Being Irish, I take the art and craft of storytelling very, very seriously. And so getting people to talk about their real lives, and I don't mean just Oprah dialogue, group hug, cry fest,
Right.
God forbid, but to have people engage in conversation in light of things that are really serious and that really matter, and in light of the accumulated wisdom of the people who've gone before us. As a teacher, that's a very great thrill for me. So I want to teach you how to make Plato and Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas your conversation partners, to get them to talk to each other and then to talk to you and then to talk to all of us together. And when you see that work and the lights come on, there's nothing better.
Yeah, I agree. And it's odd. We're in such a divided place right now, and because of due to the algorithms and our innate tendencies to group up, we have gotten very, very divided around a set of ideas, on two sets of ideas, one might say. But I woke up this morning with an idea in my head that I wanted to bounce off you. I thought, I wonder if. I mean, I understand the urge to vanquish the other. I mean, that's this tribal thing that just in case they mean us ill, we better kill them just in case.
Right.
They dress slightly different than we are. They could pose a threat. Let's just wipe them out and talk later.
Right.
So I understand the fear-driven need to vanquish, but I'm wondering if, for instance, the outsized immediate hatred of Donald Trump that produced like people rushing into the streets, I wonder if that wasn't so much driven by a need to hate and vanquish as it was for a need for community. So that all the people out there in their pink hats, they were there, it's often said that soldiers in the trenches aren't so much mad at the enemy as they are protective of their brothers in the trench with them.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm wondering if there might be a way that we can find a ray of hope in that to know that the most vociferous trolls online are seeking the company of the other vociferous trolls. And maybe that's a start.
Right. I mean, what you've identified is by nature, we're social. I mean, even a hermit is in some way dependent upon others. And so we need to interact with each other. We need to do that well. I guess from a developmental point of view, you can understand why tribes and groups were formed, etc. And then when you've got fallen human nature, gets involved in that tribalism, you end up with a lot of ugly wars and slaughters. And one of the great gifts of Christianity to the world was to have a sense of universal human dignity. And, rather than just doing right by the members of your tribe, you have to do right to everyone because they're made in the image and likeness of God. For a lot of different reasons, that's gotten lost, that's got shunted aside. To kick it up theologically just for a moment before we get back to history, theologically, made in the image and likeness of God, God is a community of persons. God is Trinity. God is lover and beloved. So to be like unto God is to imitate God in self-donation and in gracious reception. And when that dynamic isn't fulfilled in a healthy way, we're going to try to feed it in an unhealthy way. Our electronic devices have separated us. There are people who deliberately set up instances of divide and conquer. And so we've gone from virtue signaling to hate signaling, because virtue is demanding. Hate's pretty easy. And so what we have is cheap community, false ersatz community. At least we can rally around a common point of hatred. And, you know, the scholar Rene Girard has done brilliant exegesis on the danger of scapegoating. Right. And this is what I fear we see being played out. And so to bring it into the immediate, I think the scapegoated people now are going to be the unvaccinated. The vaccines aren't working because those damn vaccine hesitant people.
Well, it's very interesting that, you know, and I myself am vaccinated and have been concerned about some of my audience, because some of my audience are my age and older, but they don't try to stay slender like I work so hard to do, and some of them are in risk groups. But if you look at the numbers, and to the credit of David Leonhardt, who writes the daily newsletter for the New York Times, they were talking about how COVID numbers are down all over the country, and Leonhardt says even in the red states, even among the unvaccinated. But COVID seems to kind of come and go and pose a threat and then leave of its own accord. To a degree, but I do hear you. There has been this scapegoating, and of course, because I was saying I would advise you to get a vaccine. I've introduced it, and I mean I've investigated and found it to be healthy, safe, and healthy. Then I immediately got scapegoated as a Democrat. I was immediately called a Democrat. There's this. Everybody's turned into these. They have these toggle switches on their head, and unless they hear a complete repeat of their own narrative, they put you in the category of the opposite. And we're losing the nuance that's necessary to be wise, I think.
Right. I think, what was his name? David Hogg, who's kind of the anti-gun rights enthusiast, said he will continue to wear a mask lest that people think he's a Trump supporter. I've done a lot of work in medical ethics. I'm on the ethics committee for the Catholic Medical Association. And I say every day on the air, I'm not a healthcare provider. I don't give medical advice on the air. But I will say this, there is an inclination to look for people to blame. And so the COVID issue will come and go. But again, the issue of scapegoating, I mean, AT&T has just announced a personnel policy where their white employees pretty much have to admit that everything wrong in the world is because those people are white. So white people, white men, white cisgendered men, white cisgendered heterosexual men, white cisgendered heterosexual Christian men, we're everything that's wrong in the world. Right. And denial is proof of guilt. Where do we go with that? That's what concerns me. There has to be a sense of common humanity, and then there has to be a sense of we're all in this together. And then ultimately, how we treat each other is of significant concern to God. And we need to bring that dimension back into the conversation.
You have a lovely way of putting that. Maybe I'll trigger it. I'd love to hear your way of saying I should have written it down, but because I know how God cares about you, I then
I said because of who God is, and because of who you are to God, I choose to love and serve you.
That's beautiful. That's
and I think that's the best thing that we can do, and it kind of puts a break on self-seeking and ulterior motives, and it doesn't say anything about I agree with you or I like you.
Right, and my audience is largely Christian, And I'm not hearing an awful lot of love thy enemy coming out of them. And I'm not 100% sure if that's a thing that Christ said, but certainly love thy neighbor is considered to be.
Oh, no, no, he does say, love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you. And we have to step back from him and say, can we have a sober conversation about love? I mean, people who are around saying love is love, I said, that's about as helpful as saying circles are round. I said, love is a true statement to the degree that you're talking about love. The
Right.
medievals had a way of describing love, and Latin lends itself to pithy statements. Amor benevolentiae. The flat-footed translation would be benevolent love, but it means wishing, wanting, willing, desiring, urging, working for the best for the beloved. The best for the beloved is God. Right?
Hmm.
And so Aristotle said a good community is one that makes it easier to be good. The Catholic teaching on the common good, despite the hijack versions you hear today, isn't about redistributing wealth at government gunpoint with different NGOs taking their cut off the top. The common good is setting up a culture that makes it easier to become holy, so that when you see God face to face at the end of your days, you can have a happy ending. So let's work towards that. So people who misunderstand me, dislike me, mistrust me, rightly or wrongly, I have an obligation to God to try to bring out the best possible outcome for that individual. And that means telling them the
That was a
truth.
Freudian slip there. The best possible income for that.
Yeah, yeah, that little
We'll
slip
turn
show.
you into a leftist yet.
Well, like St. Paul said, I too work out my salvation in fear and trembling. But the point is this, that we have to work towards bringing out the best outcome for each other, and that's to get ready to meet God. So being humane with each other, being charitable with each other, it's not a strategy.
Right.
It's not an opportunity to gain. It's an opportunity to imitate God.
Right.
And mirror what he is. And so when we see healthy communities, when we see healthy families and marriages, that gives us an indication that we're meant for something more.
Right. And I think that, when you look at the divide between a conservative and a liberal, I always see that this is sort of like Ward Cleaver and June Cleaver. When the beaver screws up, June wants to, Beaver, maybe a cookie would help. Like the hover mom who's saying,
Right.
little Madison, what's troubling you enough that you smack this other kid in the face? What's troubling? It's that sort of let me care for you. But you need to wait for the father get home. Wait till your father gets home, guy too, right? So Ward comes home, the lawgiver. So I think that these are the innate human things, because, as you say, we are built for community, but we are also built for protecting that community if need be through aggression. We had to kill other animals, obviously, so we had to team together to do ill harm to some other biological creature.
Right.
So and always along the way, when I look at the Ten Commandments, I think these can't have seemed like new ideas. There must have been so many people. Do not covet thy neighbor's wife. Yeah, that has always gotten me in trouble.
Right.
I've been knocked over the head so many times for coveting my neighbor's. Do not steal. Oh, you know what? That was always bad when for me.
And I sure as heck didn't like it either. You see, there's an idea that God was bored, and he generated a list of arbitrary rules just because. And so if you're Protestant, the collection of arbitrary rules is Scripture. And then if you're Catholic, the arbitrary rules is made up by a group of celibate men who want to be a buzzkill for everybody else. And that's not true. I mean, there's actually an intelligent design to our bodies, our minds, and our souls. And the claim of natural law is that if we reflect with attention and observation on our bodies and our relationships, we can begin to figure out, tell the truth, don't be a jerk, don't initiate violence, love your kids, don't eat grandma, don't take other people's stuff. And then that becomes elevated more so in Christianity, where, hey, all that righteous behavior, it's not just for the tribe. It's meant for everyone. I once attended a prayer service as a young Jesuit, and I was urged to pray for our so-called enemies. And I said that evacuates the meaning of Christ's command. If it's only so-called enemies, then getting along with each other should be easy. I know that as a Catholic Christian, there are people who want me compromised, silenced, or even dead.
Mm.
And there are sectarian and secular and preternatural enemies that I have because this is not a fashion statement. I'm making a claim about life, the universe, and everything. And I have to act accordingly. And God's not glorified by my being naive.
Well, what I think one of the framings in your book that's so helpful is you talk about the metaphysical, which I always thought was sort of woo-woo, but is basically, it's everything.
Right.
It's all things that you can imagine. And then you talk about the anthropological. So you're saying, okay, we're doing this in the context of humans. Let's get a look at what humans really are.
Right.
Let's open our eyes. Let's, let down our guard, look at them.
Right.
And then you move on to ethics. And
yes.
So you understand that you're understanding that there is this human element. And then there is this thing that is beyond the human element, as another one of your great phrases, I am not just my body.
Right. I'm always more than just my body, but my body is where you can begin to find me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love the begin is a great, word in there too. You can begin to find me.
Right. Yeah, the book is a movement of specification. My initial training, especially at the doctoral level, was in metaphysics. So I'm happy at the 9th level of abstraction. So I thought the biggest chapter would be on metaphysics. It's actually pretty brief, but I try to lay out what are the rules of the account of the real. And then there's a type of thing that's real, that's human. And now I'm going to look at human in terms of what ought they to do.
Yes.
But it turns out that the biggest chapter, I call it the chapter that wouldn't die, was the anthropology, because it turns out humans are so complex. We're hybrids, we're public and private. We're in relation and we're alone. We're rational and not rational. We're bodily and we're not bodily. And getting all that to fit together was a real Rubik's Cube challenge. But once you get that into place, then a lot of the ethics almost becomes obvious.
Right. And, it is complicated to talk about us, humans, particularly in light of some of the theories that are coming out of the intellectual world. And one of my favorite intellectuals is Sam Harris, but he drives me crazy because he somehow got off on this tangent that there is no such thing as free will. And he shows up willingly, time and time again, to places where he then argues that there is no such thing as free will. And I'm wondering, boy, he's sure being manipulated by something to have this conversation. And he keeps saying things like, we don't decide to smell something when there's an air in the world. So where's the choice? I'm saying no one has ever said that that's what free will is. Free will is everybody knows that thoughts come unbidden. Everybody knows that impulses come unbidden. This is not what we're talking about. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about what we then do when we have an unbidden desire. That's where free will kicks in. And he seems to miss that entirely. And none of these, groups of intellectuals seem able to just say, Sam, I know you're way, way deep in this, but you forgot the basic premise of free will.
Right. You see, again, going back to my mentor, Dr. Paul Weiss, he said philosophers let theories get in the way of what they and everyone else know. And that's why the book is called Real Philosophy for Real People. It's to kind of cut to that chase. I mean, people who claim to be absolute relativists just take their wallet and see how they respond. I remember reading, I think it was John Sire was telling us about being at a cocktail party with a college professor with his tweed jacket, with his elbow on the mantelpiece and his drink in his hand, talking about, everything is an illusion. We can't really be certain. He says, just go up to him and whisper in his ear, dude, your fly's open. If he looks, then he's a fraud.
Right.
So let's not do any kind of that posturing and nonsense. People are living and dying, and they need to enter into eternity well. let's focus on that rather than those mind games.
Even if you could prove that this whole world is some sort of illusion or whatever, what would it matter? It's the constant illusion that remains each and every day. And I went through the phase of, I was raised Catholic, and then I went through the phase of getting into the sort of Buddhist sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so, after a while, I thought, okay, I'm just not buying into this idea that this is all sort of a theatrical event, that the Godhead broke into
Hmm.
billions of people and then all got together so that we could learn some lessons. I would think, well,
Hmm.
we must already have known those lessons to go to all that trouble. So that fell apart for me after a while, and
Right.
sewed in with that was that it's all an illusion.
Right. Yeah, and I said, look, if it's all an illusion, who's being deceived?
Exactly. And to
Doesn't there
what
have to be
end?
a real agent who is being deceived? And it's just like there's no free will. I said, well, look, if you are compelled to show up at public conferences, Sam Harris, and talk about there's no such thing as free will, it's as inevitable as turning on a radio and getting static. And what you're saying and mere static on the radio intrinsically have the same meaning and value. So
Yes.
why
And
bother?
and he does edge very close to saying, he'll say, once you realize there's no free will, you then find it hard to hate somebody for, say, murder. And I go, well, that is very, very close to saying, let's just understand murder. And and I don't
Right.
mean to pick on him on this, but
Right.
the idea that you don't have the same experiences that led that person to have the impulse to murder. Oh, I have the impulse to murder 46 times a day.
Right. Right.
But I every single time I choose not to. And it was funny because I was out walking around in the neighborhood doing my evening walk when I was listening to Sam Harris on somebody's podcast, and he got into that again. It was driving me crazy, as it always does. And I was going to go into the supermarket, and I have something in the supermarket that I am almost unable to resist. And I said,
Hmm.
well, I'm going to go into the supermarket, and I'm going to walk the aisles, and I'm not going to buy that thing, while listening to Sam Harris tell me that there is no
Yeah.
free will. And I
Yeah.
made it
Yeah.
out of the supermarket and came home and felt very good about myself.
Right. Right. Well, that really hard denial of free will is nonsensical, because then it's just atoms making chemical processes happen, in which case all we're doing is insignificant noise. But there's also a kind of a determinism that's psychological, that, because of poor potty training and bad childhood experiences, it is inevitable that you do these things. For example, I spent a year as a chaplain at a trauma center at a major urban hospital. And that's how I ended up getting involved in medical ethics. And I was doing an overnight shift. And one of the last traumas towards the end of the shift was a woman who came in beaten to a pulp by her husband. And that sort of thing makes me crazy. So the next chaplain comes in, who happens to be a woman, and I'm giving her a report of what happened. And I was so upset about this woman being pulverized by her husband. And she said, well, I'd like to meet the husband to hear his story. And I said, I have absolutely no interest in his story at all, because no story that a man can tell can end with, and that's why I had to beat the snot out of my wife. No story. I know enough about human nature at a basic level to know that no story can possibly end that way righteously.
Right.
So I got blank stares after that, but I'm used to that by now.
Well, this brings me around to the idea of social institutions, and we've talked briefly about people withdrawing into the computers, but where they used to have to reach out to was social institutions, and of course the
Hmm.
family, education, their jobs. It used to be
Hmm.
that jobs had, most people worked in a factory where there was just about 200 people, maybe, and so
Hmm.
that everybody had some degree of accountability, even socially. My
Hmm.
father was an agnostic and went to church every single Sunday. And one time I
Hmm.
asked him, Dad, you don't technically believe in God per se. Why do you go to church? And his answer to me was, Dave, I'm never more than 7 days away from being reminded that on a Sunday morning, people just like me get up and put on their good clothes rather than sleeping in, and they trundle off to church and they sit there in rows for the purpose of declaring their intention of being better people.
Right.
He goes, I need that influence in my life. I need
Okay.
to be around people. And I thought, that's a social institution at work. And my
Right.
father was bright enough to become involved with it, even if
Hmm.
some of the particulars might not have been exactly to his liking.
Well, no, I mean that is a good clarity. I wonder what the outcome would have been if he had heard better preaching. That's another
Yes,
topic for
we had
another time.
Franciscans, I believe.
Okay. Well,
We
biting
didn't
my
have
tongue.
Jesuits.
No, no. Some of my best friends are Franciscans. Honest. Uh, Look, during the COVID interruption,
Hmm.
um, you know, I I got shut down for months and months. I couldn't offer the sacraments in public. And as a Jesuit, I've been around the world. I've had to go on the down low into some shady situations and be out of uniform and pretend to be somebody else to
Hmm.
bring the gospel and sacraments to people. And that's what I signed up for, and I was happy to do that. But never in my life did I ever dream that one Sunday in America I would have Easter Sunday Mass by myself.
Wow.
Nothing prepared. I spent Holy Week in doing the Holy Week services in a makeshift altar in my room by myself, and
Wow.
it was a terrible desolation. Uh, uh, yeah, it was heartbreaking for me, and I wondered, did I fail in some way? I don't know, but I also swore, I'm not doing that anymore, never again.
Did
Uh,
you just not have a congregation that you were a part of at that
Well, no,
time?
I mean, we were all locked down. We
Oh, it
couldn't
was the
open the
lockdown.
churches. It was the
That's
lockdown.
yeah,
So
of
yeah, so
course.
there was no congregation.
Yeah.
Nobody was allowed. And the idea of doing it virtually, here's what happened. And I've heard this from a lot of pastors when they said, okay, it's all right to come back to church. I heard people say, and they said it to their pastors, it's just so much easier to have it on the TV in the background so you can kind of make breakfast and kind of get ready for your day with the church elevator music in the background, and you
Hmm.
check the box and you make your electronic donation, and then you have the rest of the day free. And I
Yeah.
said, that's absolutely not Christian. That's disincarnate. For a
Hmm.
Christian, matter matters. Bodies and what you do with them are really important. And you can tell transcendent perennial truths by the things you do physically. And we need to be with each other. So my ideal Sundays before I joined the Jesuits was every Thursday night, a group of friends, and we were all in our mid-20s at the time. Every Thursday night we'd get together and we'd pray over the upcoming Sunday scriptures. We'd go to mass together, go out for coffee and bagels, and talk about the sermon and what God was doing in our lives. And it took 2/3 of the day. And it was a sense of Sabbath, of stepping away from the routine to remember that there's more to life than just the routine. And so Sunday didn't just become getting ready for Monday day. And I wish people would rediscover that wisdom. And the COVID interruption, it, it was horrible. I think it was horrible for Christians.
I found myself losing perspective terribly.
Hmm.
I spent most of my time in here.
Hmm.
And I did get out quite a bit, and of course I saw my friend Alexia. Early on we decided that we were in the same germ group, and
Hmm.
we would rise or fall together. So
Okay.
we still socialized, but she had to do all of her classes over Zoom,
Hmm.
and I didn't get out very much. I didn't. I'm accustomed to going out and playing music on an open
Right.
mic somewhere two or
Hmm.
three times a week, just to keep reminded that, okay, that's what I do. That's a thing,
Hmm.
and I rub up against people and things happen to me. People say things I wasn't expecting. I can't control the environment, and that's the whole point.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
want to be, I want to be stimulated by other people that I can't, in
Right.
a way I can't predict. And
Right.
so I rebelled against the Zoom stuff.
Hmm.
But then I finally got online and realized, well, it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. And
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
afraid now, though, that it's become such a habit that people are doing it because it's a lot easier to just clean this little bit of my house behind me
Hmm.
than it is to have people over.
Right, to host a dinner party, for example.
Yes.
No, I would usually give bioethics lectures in December at the University of Mary, and last year I had to do it online, and it was okay, but it wasn't great. I didn't care for it. You know, I had a couple of speaking engagements this month, Fort Worth and Orlando, and there is something electric about being in the presence of real people
Yes.
and talking about stimulating things and having and exchanges, and it brings out the best in us. It brings about a fruition that you can't have anywhere else. Now, I'm an introvert by temperament. This is God's little joke on me. He keeps shoving me into public, even though he made me an introvert. So I'm happy with my books and my writing. And during the worst of the lockdowns, I was still broadcasting every day. And I said to my friend and engineer, Matt Maloney, who's a great guy, I said, we need to do something else. So for 93 days in a row, we did something called the Preaching in a Time of Pandemic Project. And I would take the gospel verse of the day and just offer a very brief sermon. And people loved it. And they said, are you going to do the Preaching Not in a Time of Pandemic project next? And they said it was reassuring to know that somebody was showing up every day and to say, hey, I'm still here and God is still here and we're all in this together. So I was glad to have access to the microphone. I'm not thrilled about the camera thing. I think I have a face that was just made for radio. I don't like to attract. I think I don't like attracting attention to myself. I want to point to Christ and get out of the way. And that's why one of the reasons why I prefer radio. But what we found in our studies of COVID and radio and media is that the shrieking and the histrionics, that business model is actually beginning to contract. And what people want is a sane, sober, informed voice showing up every day, being honest about both the darkness and the light. And that's what we're trying to do with the Catholic Current.
It's interesting. I was thinking this morning about ego, particularly what I was doing. I was playing a little guitar, and this voice came on in my head that said, "Oh, you're wonderful," and immediately I started screwing up, and I call that the ego note. Where the minute I start praising myself for my greatness, I can no longer do it. I have to be once removed from it. And when I write songs, I am permitted to follow the muse, whatever it is that's giving me this song, but I am not permitted to chase. You know, I can follow, but I can't give chase. I can't run the thing to ground and force that song to come today. I have to accept it as it comes. And so it's always a dance with me between the ego and something else. And you have, in order to, though introvert that you be, as happy as you would be to read your books and write your books and be alone much of the time, you have to, in order to get the message across that you'd really like to get across, you have to be somewhat of a public figure.
Yes.
And this reminds me a little bit of this reminds me a little bit of the idea that, well, I know that my neighbor is short on groceries, so I'm going to sneak over there and leave some groceries, and that would be considered the humble way to do it, and you sneak away. But then again, at that point, you have left no example of somebody who is generous. And so there's this little dance between being of service and also, for some of us, serving as an example. And that is treacherous territory for an ego.
Well, yes, it is, and there is a place for self-forgetfulness. One of my professors, Dr. William Desmond, says, "Why is it that a philosopher can never be a flamenco dancer?" And he said, "Granted, most philosophers can't walk a straight line unless they have a briefcase full of books on either hand for balance." He said, "But the flamenco dancer gets up on the table and gives herself absolutely to the dance." Whereas a philosophy professor would say, "Oh, I'm dancing now. I wonder what that means in the great scheme of things, and can I get a publication out of this?" And then you'd fall off of the table. So for someone who's involved in Christian service, the measure is John the Baptist, who when Christ came said, "He must increase and I must decrease." And you know, as a musician, you get to a point where you're not saying this note, that note, the other note. You're in the zone, you're in the flow. I mean, my sister is a world-class martial artist. She loses herself in the form. One of the reasons I love the traditional Latin Mass so much is that so little depends on me. The ritual is there for you. You're focused. You give yourself to it. And then you find yourself at the end of it, and you don't really know how you got there, but you know you've seen. You come
Yes.
out the other side. You know you've been there. There are times where you know you've stepped through the veil, and that's the genius of ritual. And likewise, when I have to do speaking on the radio, I love having great guests and great conversations. The Friday format changed in June. It's all me. There's 10 minutes of weekend readiness, getting people ready for Sunday Mass, but there's 50 minutes of what I call, let's talk about this. And I just walk people through a complex issue, step by step. And I just give myself to the problem. So when Paul Weiss said, good teaching is the sound of an honest man thinking out loud, on those Friday 15-minute segments, I don't have any notes. I've thought about it. I've prayed about it. And I submit to the presence of God, and I submit myself to the demands of the problem for the benefit of the audience. And then the ego doesn't intrude. I don't have to worry about, I hope people are going to remember this one. Hey, did I just say something that's meme worthy? You start tying your shoelaces together. That way you come to a bad end inevitably.
Yeah, I had a mentor when I was younger, and Ed Kirsty was his name. And I was struggling with this problem. I was starting to perform out quite a bit, and I'd get very nervous and anxious about it. And he finally convinced me, well, you got to, on your way to the gig, you get out of the idea that I'm going there, gee, I hope they applaud, gee, I hope they accept me, I hope I get some acclaim, because you're in that head. That's why you have an upset stomach.
Right.
You're in that head. Go there and say, okay, somewhere between when one person plays and another person starts playing, I'll do my thing. It's just what I came here to give. If I make a mistake, I showed my humanity. No problem. It's not a crisis. But I forgot where I was going with this. But
well, let me interject, because you triggered something to me. When I was a very new priest, I was at a university, and the last Sunday Mass before Christmas, they called it the pre-Christmas liturgy. It was a very big thing. We had to move it to the gym. You'd have 3,500 people, and I was asked to preach. And it was 6 months to the day that I had been ordained a priest. Never preached to such a large congregation before. And all the priests had lined up, and one of my brothers decides to be helpful by saying, so are you nervous yet? And I said, no, I hadn't thought about that until now. Thank you. And I thought for a moment, and I said, no, I really don't have to be. Because like, if I have to stand in front of a crowd of people and tell people that Bob McTeigue from Newark, New Jersey is great, then I'm going to be nervous, because I can't make that sale, because I know me too much. But if I can point to Christ and get out of the way, and you see, that's the freedom of self-forgetfulness. I'll give you an example. I was on mission in Southeast Asia in very terrible conditions, and we had an outdoor mass. It was a large gathering, people sitting on the ground, and we had a long line of priests snaking their way through the congregation to get to the altar. And people would see the priest, and they would reach out, and they would touch the hem of my robes and then kiss their hands. And I said, you know what? No one said, oh my God, it's Bob McTeigue from Newark, New Jersey. I need to get some of that mojo. No, it was because I was there in persona Christi, in the person of Christ.
Right.
Alter Christus, another. It was because of what was in the vessel that God had put for his sovereign reasons, and the vessel itself didn't matter. So when you realize, I just have to show up and be faithful. Right. And that's where we come back to the phrase you like of, because who God is and because who you are to God, I choose to love and serve you. Then I don't have to get in the way with ego. I mean, the temptation is there. We're fallen, we're finite. But you can make it a habit of that kind of self-effacingness, and that allows Christ to shine through.
That's one of the most valuable things to have on stage, is to be able to self-deprecate, to be able to make fun of yourself a little bit. And people tell me sometimes, never let them see you sweat. I go, why? I hadn't realized that I was supposed to be, that storytelling through song was in some way supposed to be a seamless demonstration of my own superpowers.
Right.
That's part of the whole thing. I'm there to communicate.
Right.
I'm just there to communicate. I want whatever it is that comes out of me to go into the other people. And if I make a screw up, and then start the song again, say, oops, and start the song again, am I concerned they'll come away with well, that wasn't very professional? No, I'd
Right.
rather they think he's just a real dude. He's just a dude, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when
I
I would
like
start
seeing him.
teaching, whenever I got to a class and I would have to write on the board for the first time, I'd say, "You're about to see my horrible secret." And everyone would lean forward. I said, I have the handwriting of an 8-year-old. And then I just kind of scribble on the board that way. No, that kind of self-deprecation, it's really very freeing. And then it says, "Oh, this guy is taking the trouble to be real with me, to be vulnerable with me." You know, in Greek, the word for truth, aletheia, one sense of it is it's an unveiling. It's a disclosing,
Right.
and there is a kind of self-revelation involved. So, you know, in the chapter on anthropology, I don't know, we got to the part yet where I talk about I, it, I, you, and I, thou.
Right.
So, for example, if I'm flying an airplane, whether it's 150 pounds of you or bananas, it doesn't matter because object.
It's
I,
all the
you
same to
sit
the laws
of physics.
aviation,
And so
physics, right?
at the level of IU, if you're my waiter, it doesn't matter if it's Dave or Sally, just bring me my coffee. But
Hmm.
I know that you're human and you're not an object. You're not the coffee cup. And then I, thou, there's something unique about you as an individual. You're Dave Morrison with a history and things to say that no one else can say. I want to pay attention to that. And part of the difficulty, the danger of social media is there is no opportunity for almost no opportunity for I thou. So I
Right.
it, you know, you the Trump supporter, you the abortion advocate, you the this, you the that. We're so much flooded with information we can't get to know anyone. So we reduce people to the status of objects. I look at your hashtag and I decide whether or not to love or hate you. That's terrible for human life.
Yeah. I'm going out this evening. There. I've been involved in this sort of ongoing war for a number of years, primarily on Facebook. I'm not engaged nearly as much now, but I came out as a conservative around the time of Mitt Romney going
Hmm.
up against Barack Obama, and I'd always felt, geez, things were getting more and more woke on the left and harder to buy into in any way.
Hmm.
And so I was moving further, and the people I came under like a group attack from all the musicians in Los Angeles who knew me. Basically, there
Hmm.
was this group attack on me, and so I retreated and ran behind a bunch of other conservatives and sort of adopted their coloration there for a while
Hmm.
until I figured out exactly what I do believe. And
Okay.
so, but I have been reaching out to some of the people in my past. One particular guy named Sal Guitarres, who is a musician around town, and he had over that period of time consistently, especially in the last couple of years, reached out to me and invited me to this event that he does
Hmm.
out in Tarzana, California, and I'd kind of always figured another reason not to be there.
Hmm.
But last time they did it, I said, I'm going to go do Sal's thing. I'm just going to watch him do his thing. So I went out there and I
Hmm.
watched Sal and the event that he puts on. And then he again invited me, and I accepted this time. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be on stage with a bunch of people who, over the last 3 or 4 years, have taken some whacks at me, and I've whacked back.
Hmm.
And I've just given up on the need to do that. I don't have to get even with anybody anymore.
Right.
I'm going
Yeah,
to
it's not
just say,
interesting.
okay, look, I feel like they've been held captive by a bunch of bad ideas. So I feel like in a way, I'm trying to let Patty Hearst out of the closet. In a sense,
Yeah.
as opposed to necessarily blaming Patty for everything.
Right.
So,
Right.
I've been captive to some bad ideas myself from time to
Yeah.
time,
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
I'm just ready to call a truce and get on to the idea of going, okay, these are the values that I represent. I'll be the conservative in the room because you guys
Hmm.
need one. And
Hmm.
more and more
Hmm.
people are starting to hear that, yeah, maybe we do need a couple of conservatives in the room. And you seem
Yeah.
pretty solid, Dave. So,
Right. You, I mean, you want a fair hearing, and you ask not to be reduced to a caricature.
Right.
When I was teaching rhetoric classes, the final project was you had to give a 7-minute public speech, and then you'd set the context. It would be
Yes.
fundraising or personal testimony. And there's one gifted student, Paige Pilarski. I think she's married now, so her name may have changed. She said, I want to do something really challenging. So what do you want to do? She says, I want to depict myself going to a group that advocates for gay marriage, and I want to defend natural marriage. And I say, the only thing I want at the end of this conversation is for you to invite me back. I thought that was a brilliant challenge.
Hmm.
And she's like, I don't hate you. I want to have a conversation with you. I just want to convince you to invite me back. Hear what I have to say. And she pulled it off. She worked really hard on it, but it was brilliant. And I think part of what we have to do is to get ourselves to be invited back. And yes, there are topics about which honorable people may not disagree. There really is some hard and fast black and white issues. Some things are always good, some
Right.
things are always evil, and that's non-negotiable. And I'm okay with arguing with that. There's a lot of legitimate gray
Right.
that are prudential matters. And one of the reasons I think my book can be useful is that no matter what your starting point is, here's a set of tools and categories to help you to do it better, to not only come to clarity, but to help other people come to clarity. And I think that kind of clarity matched with humility and curiosity, I think that's the way forward.
I do too, and I've figured out a quick way to phrase it, and maybe I've mentioned this to you before, that the left is represented by these 5 worlds: building the world we dream, and the right, to me, or conservatism,
Mm-hmm.
is represented by these 5 words: what works with human nature. So
Right.
I will listen to anything from any left winger
Mm-hmm.
if it comports with human nature, as I've come to understand it. I'll
Right.
think, you may have a point there, but the
Right.
minute it starts being divorced from what I know about human motivations, and when the giving starts becoming enabling, which happens so often, I check out,
Right.
and more I'm able to say, look, this is that enabling thing. This is
Right.
that thing you got
Right.
to watch out for. We have to make people strong. So I get
Right.
how you as a liberal aren't capable of doing that. Let me handle this.
Right. See,
You know?
that's absolutely essential. That's why in my book, Real Philosophy for Real People, anthropology is it's the largest chapter, because if you don't know what a human being is, then you're just going to make stuff up for what's right and wrong,
Right.
for what's true and false. So we need to keep coming back to human nature. And there are a lot of people who want to get rid of that, to bleach that out, because once you have a nature, not only are there limitations and definitions, a man is not a woman, and they're not interchangeable, and they
Right.
mean something together, et cetera, et cetera. And some people see that as a buzzkill. But then you might ask the question, if it's this human nature and not a human happenstance, where did the nature come from? What is the wisdom and purpose of the agent who designed and gave us the nature? And then we might be accountable to that wise, good, supreme agency. And that's the ultimate buzzkill, because I want what I want when I want it. And that's why I think there's a very great push to eliminate any sense of human nature at all, make it all just convention, objects of the will, the latest system of oppression, et cetera, because there's the tyranny of my will be done. And whether it's done with individuals or large groups, or worse, large groups backed by the power of the state, we're going to end up with tragedy and bloodshed. History has shown that.
When I got into doing this political thing, I always felt like I had a philosophical mindset. I'm more of a shade tree philosopher than any sort of, I'm not an educated man, but I was always of a philosophical mind. And I thought, well, I really want to talk about philosophical ideas, but politics has eaten philosophy. And
Yes.
so it seems like the best philosophers that are out there, they're constantly talking about politics now.
Right.
And it seems like we have to extract, in a sense, we need to reach down the throat of politics and pull the philosophers back out and say, no,
Right.
politics should be downstream from philosophy because
Right.
it should be informed by good philosophy. And
Right.
now we
Right.
have generations of people who think they're getting who think they're learning how to live by imitating politicians.
Right. And Aristotle warned about that back in the day. He said, if if human interaction writ large is the highest good, if the state is the ultimate reality, then politics is the supreme discipline. But once you realize that there is reality beyond the material, then the highest discipline and the greatest good can't possibly be politics. Now, what exactly that greatest good is and what the nature of that is, again, very long conversation for another time, but it's certainly not the state and it's certainly not politics. And all that jockeying for position, Charles de Gaulle said, the cemetery is filled with indispensable men. I remember growing up in the 80s as Washington, D.C., and the bumper sticker, whoever dies with the most toys wins. I said, no, whoever dies with the most toys is dead.
I think that maybe that's a place we probably should wrap this up here because
Sure.
we've covered a lot of ground.
Right.
And I would love to talk to you in future about consumerism.
Yes.
One of my first videos was a thing where I copped to my own having a poverty brain mentality. And so I phrased it that there's poverty versus plenty versus more. And I think we live in a more society, and there is no end point to more because
Right.
it's just constantly getting more. Plenty has a nice end point. So
Yes.
maybe we could meet again sometime and we could talk
Absolutely.
about where we're going with consumerism, how we dial that back.
Right.
And
No, I would be delighted. Dave, you're an honest man, and we're having a real conversation, and I'm thrilled to do that. I'm delighted that you're reading my book. I hope you find it useful, but I'd be happy to talk to you on your channel anytime, and you're always welcome on my show also.
Well, thank you so much, Father. So I'm going to say
God's
goodbye,
peace.
but I'm going to keep you on just for a second.
Sure.
But I'm going to say goodbye to the audience. And once again, your radio show, tell them how to find it.
Sure. It's called The Catholic Current. It's on every day at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find it on the iCatholic Radio mobile app. It's on every conceivable podcast platform. You can listen to it live at the stationofthecross.com. Find it on your local radio station. We're almost coast to coast. We're not there yet. But that's where you can find us is the stationofthecross.com iCatholic Radio mobile app.
And there's
every podcast platform.
There's this book as well, and I hear there's Amazon is a thing.
Amazon is a thing, or you can get it from Ignatius Press. And if you're really ambitious, there's also this book on preaching called I Have Someone to Tell You, a Jesuit heralds the gospel.
I have that book and have not dipped into it quite yet.
Okay, so you have that to look forward to.
This was a good starting place for me.
Absolutely. And I have a weekly column at aleteia.org, aleteia.org. Type my name in there, and you'll find 7 years worth of columns there also.
So once again, everybody, this has been Father Robert McTeigue, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Thank you so much, Jeff. God bless you. Right.
All right. And scene. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and then click the little bell to get notifications.